Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world today. Welcome to this week's Ask a Professional Scrum Trainer webinar with Pawel Mysliwiec. And my name is Lindsay Vellicina. I am with Scrum.org. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager here, and I will be your host today. I have a few housekeeping items to go over, so Pawel, next slide. So this series is your opportunity to ask questions to one of our professional Scrum trainers. We have Pawel here today. So I hope everybody brought some questions. I'll go over how to submit those in a little bit, but there is a questions box on the GoToWebinar panel that you can submit to. And this is just your time to ask any questions that you have about Scrum or challenges that you're facing dealing with Scrum. It's kind of an open forum. So next slide. Just a very quick intro about Scrum.org. In case you're not familiar with us, we were founded by Ken Schwaber, one of the co-creators of Scrum, back in 2009, and we offer Scrum training and certification. We have over 300 professional Scrum trainers globally, and our classes are geared toward the roles in Scrum and also other topics, including leadership, scaling with Nexus, using Scrum with Kanban as a complementary practice. We also have our PSU class, which teaches how to integrate UX into Scrum. And our newest class is our PSTs class, which is an advanced product owner class, and it focuses on the stances of the product owner and gets a little bit deeper into product management. So feel free to check all of that out on our website. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Pawel. You can change the slide, Pawel, and introduce yourself.
I was thinking you were going to introduce me, Lindsay.
Oh, go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right. So it's always a weird setting in a webinar when you don't see people. You can just imagine them. Listening to you, and hopefully we'll make it work. I'm used to more a classroom experience, conference room experience. My main focus right now, and it's been for the past 4 years, is teaching professional Scrum. I have, as figures are stating, more than 160 classes. As a matter of fact, I finished one yesterday, the Product Owner class. I'm teaching one starting tomorrow, the Professional Scrum Master Advanced. So things are mostly oriented on teaching. When I don't teach, I'm offering public speaking, and I also coach a few organizations in some very precise on some very precise subjects like value delivery with Scrum, sometimes scaling, and sometimes also leadership challenges. So as you see, I'm a member of Pixies Network, PSM Steward for Scrum.org, which is a role I play since this summer. It's basically courseware maintenance for PSM, but I hope that your questions will not be only around PSM. I will welcome all the questions around professional Scrum. So, and here is my daughter with me, just messing around with Messenger filters. So hopefully we'll have some funny discussions in the next hour. So let me know if you have some questions.
Sounds good. If you want to switch to the next slide, Pawel.
Oh, there is a next slide. I should have checked slides.
No worries. I just want to give everyone some quick guidelines. As you can see on the screen here, here are some instructions on how to ask questions. So please type your questions into the questions box as you have them. And you can also use the chat box if you need. If you need anything directly, you can send them to me directly, Lindsay, or use the question box. So all of that info is there. So if you guys want to start sending in your questions now, that would be great. We have several coming in. The first one that I would like to ask, which is one that I'm sure Pawel gets in class all the time, is can we have multiple product owners on our team?
It's a very common question. It's a very common question. It's in a class I would ask the student back to talk a little bit more about his context. Of course, not a lot because otherwise we go in, a bit into a particular discussion. So my short answer is basically it's not something we would recommend. Scrum focuses on one product owner per product. So if your team is working on a single product, Scrum says that you should have only one product owner. Multiple product owners might look interesting from the organizational perspective sometimes when we cannot figure out who should be the product owner on a particular product. However, it presents some challenges. Most common ones are the decision latency time. What this savant what this term means is basically the time it takes to take a decision. Product owner's responsibility is often to decide what's the best for the product so that the team can focus on the most relevant thing that creates value for the organization. And when you have multiple people that need to coordinate their efforts to decide together, it gives often times place to many delays in the decision process, which can hurt the team and the team can struggle to deliver the done increment every sprint in this setting. So what we do recommend though is if you have multiple people who are right now playing the product owner role, could you consider one of them becoming the product owner to represent the other current product owners as stakeholders? A product owner can represent a committee of stakeholders. That's not a prescribed, that's not a forbidden thing by Scrum. So if you have multiple people that are needed to take a decision and they can be represented by one product owner, well, the decision latency time can still be big, but at least the team can focus on working and discussing things with only one of them, and it gets much better to understanding what is the most valuable thing, as only one person can explain to them directly. So that's kind of maybe a little bit rough-edged answer, but I hope it helps you continue in your journey right now with your product.
Yeah, and we actually have another question that came in related to that from Paula here, and she said, in her experience, the company sometimes doesn't want to have just one product owner, but wants a product owner for any single part of a project. So the example she gave here is if on a website there are 11 editorial owners, they ask to have 11 product owners. So so I know you talked about this a little bit, but do you have any other insight for her on how to manage that issue?
So I've been in a similar situation. We've been working in a company, changing the website for the company, and we had the same particular challenge. There is only one website, and many different business units wanting to have their product owner representing their issues on the team. Now we've been quite happy to have multiple Scrum teams working on this website, as it was a major transformation of the content and of the structure of the website for a big company. So what we did was, well, for teams, for bigger business units, there was one or a few teams working with a single product owner from a bigger business unit standpoint, so that this product owner could collaborate with a team or with two teams on a broader business area, making it more domain-related content creation and structure creation. Smaller business units, what they did is basically there was a small panel of business representatives that was feeding one team using more a Kanban-oriented flow process that was working for multiple business representatives on smaller domain-related content adjustment that could be done by a single team. So it was like kind of like a hybrid On one hand, Scrum Teams. On another hand, more a flow-oriented team. And we did a scaling approach where these different teams were coordinating between each other on integration issues. It was not exactly the same as Nexus. It predated a little bit Nexus. We inspired ourselves from less at this point in time, but we did have some success because it limited the decision making time for many teams because only one person was making these decisions, and there was a project structure on the top of this. So if there was some disagreements on between team level, between different teams on the integration issues, or between product owners of different parts of the platform, there was someone from the program management representing the business sponsor who could always take the final decision. So as you see in real life, the framework can still guide you to make decisions. However, sometimes you need to make adjustment based on the fact that the company is still following project structure, while we try to focus on one product owner per team. So I hope it will be helpful to help you with your issue. Just finding out maybe bigger types of domain that could be served by one team, and maybe giving all the other domains a team to, in a flow-based process, manage work. It could be something that you may experiment with.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's helpful, Paula. If you have anything follow-up, feel free to reach out, and Pavel can reach out to you offline as well if you have further questions. Next question here is about measurement. How would you measure the success of the individual Scrum roles and the overall Scrum team?
That's a very interesting question. We get this question a lot. Sometimes it's from a manager who's, let's say, the manager for different Scrum Masters in the team. He's asking us, how could you measure the success of your Scrum Master in a company setting? So I would just like to clarify whether we are talking about the Scrum Master role, or whether we are talking about a development team member role or a product owner role, before maybe going too far into the discussion.
Okay, Steve, if you can let us know, do you want us to walk through each of the roles, or would you like us to dive into a specific role? If you could let us up here, Steve just replied. He was hoping that you would briefly touch on each of the roles.
Okay.
And then the Scrum team as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Steve, for clarifying. So I'm going to give a few tips on different ones. Let's start with the product owner. Product owner's main responsibility, well, accountability in English. Sometimes I get messed up between English and French, that I teach in both languages. So product owner's accountability is to maximize value. I would suggest looking into product metrics. If your product delivers some value to your customer, is this value around the ROI of the product? Is this value around the adoption rate of the product? Is this around the usage rate? So this would be probably the relevant metrics to measure the success of a product owner. If we talk about a Scrum Master, for me, a Scrum Master is a tricky beast, as Scrum Master success is the success of the Scrum team. So if you have a reliable delivery of done increments every sprint, if the team happiness and engagement is high, if the Scrum Master has helped the team with organizational impediments around the team, if the product owner is maximizing the value, this would be the good indicators that Scrum Master is doing a good job. On the development team side, well, I would look into metrics like, well, there are many different metrics. I don't think velocity is the best of them, as there's often misused and misunderstood metric, velocity, which is basically just the past performance of the team. And if you use it as a performance indicator and a performance metric, it may be gained by the team. So I try to avoid using it. However, once again, if the team delivers an increment that's meeting the sprint goal every sprint, for me, it's a good indication that the team is doing a great job. We could use also into the quality metrics. If we release how much support effort there goes into the product. We could look into the maintenance side versus new features type of metric. It's called innovation rate in evidence-based management, if you're interested in learning more, which is kind of an indication whether the development team is dealing well with the technical debt, and whether the ability of the team to deliver more value every sprint is rising. So there are a few metrics I would look into that maybe are more around the reliability of the delivery, the fact that they meet the sprint goal, and also kind of quality related metrics. So I hope it's helpful. I didn't go into too much details around each one of them, but don't hesitate to reach out to me if you want to learn more.
All right, great. Thanks, Pawel. This next question is from Audra. Our team struggles with acceptance criteria and understanding what the business needs using the user story format. Do you have any other methods other than user story format that may be successful in capturing what the business needs and not miss acceptance criteria? I've been researching the hypothesis format and job story format.
Well, I have the knowledge of both of these formats. However, I have never practiced them in on the field, so it will be difficult for me to relate with some tangible examples. The hypothesis-driven format is a one we are using in the Professional Scrum with UX class when we talk about designing experiments. So I feel that maybe going a little bit deeper into understanding how you can frame a hypothesis and how you can frame the expected result could be an interesting way to investigate more the hypothesis-driven format for your backlog items. I would recommend the Lean UX book by Josh Seiden and Jeff Gottolf that we are using as a reference in the Professional Scrum of UX class. Now, many times when I hear people struggle with user stories, it could be because user story format is misunderstood. So I don't know if I guess you already have researched Mike Cohn's material on his blog on the Mountain Goat Software blog that talks about user stories. There is a great virtual training that Mike has created, and we have no cut from his creation of content. So it's just that people have taken this training. They got a lot of value based on the feedback I received. About the acceptance criteria, what we think, what I saw that most of the teams are struggling with is that acceptance criteria are sometimes vague. I've seen my experience acceptance criteria being written like the website needs to be usable, or the language needs to be clear. These are very vague acceptance criteria that leave plenty of place of interpretation. So I tend to go into more precise acceptance criteria. For instance, if there is a performance requirement, rather than saying the treatment should run fast, which can leave tons of place for interpretation, I'd rather say the treatment should execute in less than 1 second. And it creates a discussion between the development team and the product owner about how is it feasible within the next sprint to reach this performance criteria, which can, of course, happen in the refinement. So once again, if you want to learn more about user stories acceptance criteria, I'll be very happy to talk more about this subject. I don't feel much comfortable about going deeper into the job story or hypothesis-driven development. Another one I've been using quite a bit at the clients was the behavior-driven development, the BDD format, which basically frames acceptance testing as behaviors of your solution to be met, and it can be quite easily automated on the testing level, also for maintenance and easier automated testing over time. So I hope it helps you a little bit, Audra, in your challenging situation.
Great, thanks. This next question is, In your experience, are there any specific practices that can be used to order the backlog and also make it transparent?
Coming out of the product owner session, I feel it's spot on. Is the thing that we touch at the end of our second day in the product owner session. So ordering the backlog, I have some experience in the past that are mixed in ordering backlog exercises. I used to do the must go, must do, should do, could do, would do type of ordering. I used to also experiment with mandatory, important, nice to have. However, in my experience, these ordering exercises did go quite poorly, as by the end of the exercise, after a lengthy meeting with many stakeholders, we basically came out saying that everything was mandatory, or just a few elements were like important, nice to have, but like 80% of the backlog was mandatory, which is a little bit a waste of time. So ever since I've been practicing with other approaches, there are many complementary practices to order the backlog. If you are starting to build a new product and you don't know yet your value measurements, your usage metrics, it might be difficult to get into a more data-driven approach. However, there are many exercises you could try. TastyCupcakes.org is a great reference when it comes to different exercises, different complementary practices. There is also innovation games you can research on the web. The ones I had the most success with was 500 value points, buy a feature, and sometimes an even a lighter one that I started using is the 25-10 liberating structures that I use a lot to quickly order elements in the backlog in a very engaging way. So these are just a few complementary practices that has been working much better for me in my experience for backlog ordering. I hope it helps. It's difficult to order the backlog though when the product vision is unclear. So I would look first into understanding whether the product vision between stakeholders is clear, because otherwise ordering the backlog is a mess. It's my opinion against yours. So for product vision framing, I often use the elevator pitch. Sometimes we go into some more strategic canvas usage, like the lean canvas. Well, just a few practices to get your alignment easier, maybe before going into the ordering exercise.
Okay, great. We're going to switch gears a little bit. We have a question here about sprint goals. How do you have a clear sprint goal when you have a diverse product backlog with multiple products? Our Scrum team is a support team, so our backlog is a variety of bug fixes across multiple products.
This is it's funny. I was feeling like in the webinar session I will get many questions I have never heard. However, I feel that these questions are so common challenges I hear in multiple classes.
Yep.
The sprint goal is something that we focus much more right now in the Scrum community than we used to. It's quite a new focus. Even for me, when I was starting with Scrum 10 or something years back, the sprint goal was something that was never ever mentioned. We were basically just doing tasks in the sprint backlog. Now that we focus more on the sprint goal, that people come up with challenges about how to create a sprint goal. And in your situation, when you're dealing with multiple products in your later in their product lifecycle, meaning your maintenance phase, small evolution, bug fixing, this can be a challenging thing. So there are a few ways to come around with this. First of all, and maybe it's an even broader tip for other people struggling with the sprint goal, the common mistake I hear is that in the beginning of the sprint planning, people start with looking at the backlog items and starting to create tasks, and they don't talk about the sprint goal until very late in the sprint planning. And I do recommend you switch it. If you spend some time deciding what your sprint goal should be for the sprint, maybe talking with your different stakeholders, if they represent different product domains, it can align much better the plan creation for the development team in the sprint planning. So start with the sprint goal in the sprint planning. The second thing is more on the product level. And when I hear that you deal with multiple products, this discussion could maybe happen in the refinement between different product representatives you have, which could it's the discussion about cohesion. When you have multiple different items from different domains, from different products every sprint that the team is focusing on, you cannot really talk about focus or alignment. People are spending much time context switching between elements, which can be disastrous in terms of value delivered and ability to finish work. So I highly recommend that product owner with stakeholders, or in your case, your product representatives between themselves, discuss how could they combine their items so that they are more cohesive. Maybe there could be one sprint in one domain on one particular product where there are a few bugs already ready to be worked on, maybe 2 or 3 enhancements, and we could package it into a broader sprint goal and maybe do a single bug here or there for other products you're supporting. This could make a huge difference in terms of not only your ability to craft the sprint goals, but also in terms of value delivered every sprint by your team. So these are just the 2 easy, quick tips. Maybe not that easy, and especially in the second one. It's not always easy to align stakeholders around this notion that they are better served when team focuses on one stakeholder at a time. However, it's a good starting point for a conversation.
Okay, great. Next question. What is the one thing that you would quote unquote sell to a newly formed team regarding value-driven delivery?
Oh my God. I guess a sense of achievement is something I would really go into. When we talk about the value delivery, especially if it's something that we can deliver quicker than we used to do, being able to deliver value to a customer, to see customer feedback, customer satisfaction early in the process. When I mean early is maybe after the first sprint or after the second or third when we release it. It creates an incredible sense of achievement in the starting team. It's something that you don't really imagine until you see it, and there is a sense of pride because they can show something that's releasable very early in the process. It can be even released. It can drive business value, and often it creates some jealousy, maybe between quotes, from other teams about well, how you did it. We thought it was impossible. We thought you couldn't make anything before at least 6 months. And this is something that's quite spectacular when people experience it. The sense of achievement, sense of pride, sense of purpose also, because they understand how the customer uses it, which can very rarely be predictive, how a customer will use our product. So this is maybe the one thing I would focus on. If you ask me for a second one, and maybe you don't, but if you really want a second one, let's say you have 1 year of budget to work on a product. If you are able to have a releasable increment after 2 weeks or after a month, you cannot imagine how peaceful your stakeholder relationship gets if they know that something is releasable early. And team can spend 11 months out of the year just figuring out what's the best value we can bring to the customer, instead of being scared until the very last minute that they won't make it. And this peace of mind is something you cannot really underestimate in the Scrum process. So hoping it will give you some arguments.
Great. Just going through these questions. There are lots coming in. Here's another one that you probably get all the time as well, that others are probably wondering about. What is the best method for estimation, or how do you start a new team on estimating?
Estimation. That's a great question. That's a great question. Very often in agile setting with Scrum or with other approaches, we try to shy away from absolute estimation. What I mean by absolute estimation is basically estimating things in hours or in days, especially on the product backlog level. When we are planning a sprint, it's different. We can definitely go into a more granular hour-based estimation. However, on the product backlog level, we often try to do a comparative estimation. Well, of course, there are very common practices like poker planning, t-shirt sizing, or other types of comparative approaches. Their main advantage is that we are great at comparing. If I show you two different things, let me give you a quick example. So if I show you, let's say these two items. No, this one is blocked. So I show you these two items. Let's hope you see them. The coffee mug and the elephant. If I ask them which one is taller, it's obvious. However, if I go into asking by roughly how much, you might try to estimate by saying, I don't know, twice as big the elephant than the mug. Maybe it's 1.7, maybe it's 1.5. And this is what estimation is about. We don't care how high is the mug or how high is an elephant in absolute centimeters. What we care about is how relatively they are sized one against the other. And that's kind of the force behind the comparative estimation is people are less obsessed by getting it right because they know it's just about a roughly rough comparison between both. So I suggest just try one of these approaches, and if one of them works, just stick with it. If don't, you can go into something else. Common mistakes about poker planning, for instance, if we just take this one, is people try to do it before starting. And this is something that often leads to a very long sessions when nothing gets estimated or very little gets estimated. So what I really advise my clients and my students is don't do an estimation until you have finished one thing together. So when you have done one product backlog item on your product with a new team, you can go quite easy into an estimation session because people have just finished something. This can be their benchmark, their baseline to compare everything. And you can give it any value. In poker planning, the medium value is, I think, 5. So this could be a 5, even if it was a hard one. You could still compare it. It's a 5. Let's compare all the other elements to the one we just finished. When people have just done something together, they have a common base to estimate. You can also look into Kanban metrics, Kanban flow metrics like cycle time, like the lead time, working age item. Many people will prefer just skipping estimating whatsoever and using flow metrics in their development team to do the estimation part for them. This is something we cover a lot in the Professional Scrum with Kanban class. If you're interested to learn more, you may look also with the Scrum guide with Kanban that's available on the website. So hopefully it helps you a little bit with your estimation challenges.
Okay, great. Next question. Do you have suggestions on techniques to use to keep a team to the 15-minute time box for the daily Scrum? My team loves to go into too much detail and always goes over the 15-minute time box.
Well, you already hinted into one technique. Don't go into too many details. But I know it's easier said than done. I know. But I won't retract it. It's one technique. So daily Scrum is a 15-minute opportunity to inspect the progress with regards to the sprint goal we're trying to achieve. So all the discussion should be tied to how far off are we from achieving the sprint goal, and if we feel that our sprint goal is compromised, we can highlight impediments without going into too many details about them. When I say we, I talk about the development team. Scrum Master is optional at the daily Scrum. Biggest job for a Scrum Master is to help the team understand the purpose of daily Scrum and teach them how to make it into a 15-minute session. So maybe it's your challenge to address. So when all the discussions are tied to the sprint goal, it's usually more efficient. Now, a few things I tend to help the team with when I'm starting a new team is telling them that it's okay to highlight a blocking element for as long as we don't go into too much detail. What I often experience is that when we start talking about an impediment in the daily scrum during the 15-minute time box, we always go over time. And also, not everyone is engaged in this discussion. There is like often 2, 3, 4 people more engaged in the conversation about the impediment, trying to solve it. Sometimes as we are standing in the middle of the room or in front of the sprint board, we try to solve the impediment while we are at maybe the poorest place to solve it. We are standing in the middle of the room, we have no access to our computers, we have no access to the relevant technology to solve it, and we try to solve it, and we don't even understand the problem. So I suggest the team to highlight these impediments and to take them one by one as a discussion just after daily scrum. And often it gets the job done, because even people who are engaged in a conversation, they find value on doing it after daily scrum, especially when they can really understand whether they speak about the same thing. So this is just one quick tip you can try experimenting, is just park the discussion for as long as people understand who can help on the problem and what basically the problem is. 30 seconds explanation, parking the discussion, and let's move on, just to make sure that we have the whole discussion around how far off are we from achieving the sprint goal and what we should be doing in the next 24 hours to achieve it. This is the main purpose of daily scrum. I hope it helps.
Great, thank you. Next question, switching gears a little bit. When UI or UX teams and the development team are divided between two different companies, so therefore they have different Scrum teams, but they have the same product owner, how do you manage the alignment between the teams?
This is a tricky question. I like tricky questions.
It is.
It's not to say that all the others are not tricky. They are tricky. They are tricky. They're just more common. The situation where UX and UI team is in one company and the rest of the team is in another, it's quite frequent, just to be frank. And even sometimes when UX and UI people are working in the same company, they are often far off and very thinly spread across Scrum teams, in my experience, which doesn't create an easy way to collaborate. And what I see very often, it's a very similar model to a waterfall stage gate process, where UX UI team are doing things up front, then they hand it off to the product owner, then product owner approves it, and then if product owner approves it, each product owner ships it to the development team, just develop what the UX and UI people have decided, which can create many problems, and these are probably the challenges you're living. For instance, development team doesn't find it easy to implement what the UX UI people have decided. So there can be a few things that can be done. I was working with a company on a heavily UX UI project. It's been with 5 teams, and we've been using the Nexus scaled framework to do the job. And the company has started in this way. They were doing the UI first, so the mock-up screen. Then when UI was approved, it was going to the UX team, who was doing the wireframes and the user experience. Then wireframes approved, it was being shipped to the development team. It was very dysfunctional. So when the dysfunction was highlighted, we experimented with a few things. For instance, we started to engage one representative of other teams in the daily scrum of the other team, just to make sure that we highlight impediments before they occur. So when the UI guy was doing something on the mock-up screen, well, the UX person and the person from the development team were in the discussion, and they could come up with things that the UI person didn't know. This already have created a closer collaboration. Now I was quite happy because it was within the same company. They were in different cities. One was in Montreal, one was in Toronto, and the other guy, I don't have an idea which continent he was on. Anyway, it was still easier because it was the same company. Now, when you have a different company, could be trickier. We may go into more into a contractual obligations, how you draft your contracts with your provider. Many times we kind of subcontract the UI UX part to some marketing flashy design companies, and it's all about how do we phrase the agreement with them. In my experience, contract people are not always best tooled to promote agile contracting practices, and we get very often into a very difficult conversation about collaboration, about sharing ideas before they get out of the window. So the alignment can be difficult. From the product owner perspective, just to finish and wrap up, I would recommend to have one product backlog for both. Maybe he could split elements into, on one hand, UI UX part of the product backlog item, on the other hand, maybe the development team part, keeping the dependency between them, at least to have some alignment on the product level on what's being done. It won't address the challenges I've been mentioning before, but at least from the product perspective, it shouldn't be lost when the product owner has only one product backlog for both teams. I hope it helps. We dig deeper into this subject in the Professional Scrum with UX, and I'm not trying to sell classes, but we really do.
Thanks. The next question. So this next one, I'm struggling with writing product backlog items up. They're having trouble with defining product backlog items without writing activities. Do you have any suggestions?
I could do a very brief user story 101. I will not use a big time from you. I have in my possession a tablet with a nice pen, so I hope I can share with you a few things that people misunderstand about user stories, and maybe it can help you in your journey. So user story is often written as a I want, so that. And there is a very common misunderstanding about elements on what do we put after SA. So SA is a user persona. So sorry, tablets. Sorry, tablets or the person using them. So this is user persona. So user persona meaning it's a persona that uses your product. It's not a microservice, it's not a development team member, it's not an architect, it's not a database, it's not a screen, it's not a button. I've seen many of these written as user stories, and these are not user stories. So user story is as a user persona. So as a frequent flyer, for instance. Second common mistake is I want. And here many people put I want a screen, a button, I want a report, I want a treatment, and they put the solution here. While what we want is a behavior of the solution. So I want to be able to book a hotel room. As a frequent flyer, I want to be able to book a hotel room. And when you have phrased these first two from this perspective, it's very easy to come up with the business need behind. So as a frequent flyer, I want to book a hotel room so that I can sleep before my conference. I don't know. So here is your business need. This is something that often gets skipped. So I'm against using a formalism for what it's not supposed to be doing. So if you really do a user story and you follow these few guidelines, you should be quite fine staying on the business need level and connecting it to a behavior of the solution for a specific business persona. And then all the acceptance criteria are easier to phrase for this behavior. And when you have a behavior, then the team takes this behavior and can have a design session about what doesn't mean the solution. So how, for instance, how the flow diagram looks like, what are the treatment with the database you need to implement. So all these things flow quite easily when you have a behavior to implement. If you have a screen to develop, of course, it starts to look almost like a feature, like a component to do. And many times people even fall into a trap of describing tasks as user stories. As I was mentioning, as a developer, I want to develop a screen so that my user has a screen, which doesn't make any sense. Common trouble that people are having is that they use a few tools. So if you use tools like Jira or TFS, sometimes they can force you into using this type of formalism for everything you have in the backlog, which can be troublesome. So on the backlog level, I try to stay more high level on this type of granularity. When you are in the sprint level and you are already designing a solution, a flow diagram, you could basically create tasks saying that this is going to be 1 hour, this is going to be 4 hours, the test here is going to be 2 hours of development. It's much easier to do tasks on this granular level, but this is the thing that, in my experience, happens mostly in the sprint planning and not on refinement when we are discussing the business need. I know my writing skills are very poor, still learning the tablet writing like this. However, I hope it's been a little bit clarifying in terms of backlog item, which level, tasks versus business need, and maybe it helped even address the user story question before.
Yes, great. And we ended up having some more user story questions come in, so I hope that this helped to answer those as well. This next question, I think, is a great question. Is it wrong to say Scrum doesn't have flow like Kanban? I think what I am trying to clarify is flow strictly associated only with Kanban? So maybe dive into how to use Scrum with Kanban a little bit.
All right, that's a very original question. Original meaning I haven't heard it in any class setting. So congratulations. All questions are great, by the way, but this one is very original. So I wouldn't say it's wrong. Often people say it's either Scrum or Kanban. Scrum is iterations called sprints, and on the other hand, Kanban is flow. Well, the main difference between both approaches, it's this iterative incremental approach with Scrum that tries to target the value delivery by meeting done increments every sprint. On the Kanban level, often people don't have any constraints except representing the flow and managing the flow. It doesn't mean that Scrum doesn't use flow mechanics. For instance, every sprint planning plans your next sprint. There will be a flow of work during the sprint. So applying Kanban practices or Kanban-related metrics like the work in progress limit on a different type of tasks, or applying a metric like the cycle time or a lead time on every task can get you much more insights into how well your flow of work is organized in during the sprint. Also, even on the product backlog level, having a metric on every product backlog item, looking at for how long this product backlog item has been there, it could be very insightful in terms of understanding whether the clients, the internal users, have been waiting for far too long for this element. So there could be some sort of product backlog aging element that could be followed with Kanban metrics. So I feel both can benefit greatly from one another. When I was working with a Kanban team at my previous client, I was amazed how many of Scrum elements the team has brought through retrospectives. So the retrospective in Kanban is It's not called retrospective, but there is a continuous improvement opportunity in Kanban that's being promoted by the approach. And through these retrospectives, I wasn't pushing for any Scrum items, but based on the discussions that the team was having about major challenges they were living through, many of the elements of the framework came back into Kanban. So I'm against putting a huge guardrail barrier between Kanban and Scrum. I feel that both can benefit a lot from each other. There's even an approach called Scrumban, and Henrik Knieberg has made quite popular in the past. Although it has aged a little bit ever since Kanban has evolved more and Scrum has evolved more, it is still a very valuable way of doing work. And the professional Scrum with Kanban is focusing a lot on how we can leverage this flow approach and flow metrics to help Scrum teams deliver value across iterations. So hopefully it's a little bit helpful. Once again, referring back to the Scrum guide with Kanban, which is Scrum with Kanban guide. I'm not sure about the exact title, but we have a great reference about Scrum with Kanban, how it can work, and how it can be used to help development teams using already the framework develop a better understanding of their flow process.
Yes, and I just dropped the link for the Kanban guide for Scrum Teams into the chat.
Thank you.
Feel free to
Kanban
check that out, everyone. This question is fun. We have time for maybe one more after this. We'll see how long this answer ends up being. This is interesting. So, can you run Scrum across a large enterprise without trying to scale? That is, have many small Scrum teams instead of a scaled framework?
That's an interesting one. Well, applying the Scrum mindset could be done across entire organization. So, and we have examples of this type of companies already doing it. It's an example of a company that applies the Scrum mindset without even calling it Scrum is Valve Software, where they have multiple autonomous teams working in a very agile, aligned, Scrum aligned way across the whole organization. Valve Software releases this team product. You may have been using it in your private life. So this is an example of a company that applies Scrum mindset across the whole company. Now, I'd say that if you try to work on the same product across multiple teams, you could still apply the mindset quite well, but you may need a few adjustments in how your scaling is working. You could leave these adjustments to Scrum teams, and that's what's been done even before the scale frameworks existed. When I was working in 2011 in a company that was using Scrum for delivering huge platform with 7 teams, we've been trying different experiments between Scrum masters of different teams, between the product owner and the team members, to try to figure out how to make things work. And we had no scaling framework, so we basically kind of, I wouldn't say invented Scrum of Scrums because it was already there, but we kind of figured out on our own that we needed to synchronize between ourselves. We did a common retrospective every other sprint. We did figure out that out of all the product owners we're having, one of them should have the decision-making authority. So we didn't need any framework to help us figuring it out. Now, the benefit of frameworks is that instead of figuring out on your own by trial and error, frameworks are there to help you support your creativity on how you meet what the framework provides you with. For instance, Scrum doesn't say to you how to do your daily scrums, how to do your sprint planning. It's up to you to figure it out. Scrum just does say that you need a daily scrum. So if you use a framework like Nexus or Less, which are the frameworks that are probably the closest to the Scrum mindset, there is plenty of place for creativity between teams on how we reach frameworks objectives. Some frameworks are more complex, more prescriptive. Scaled Agile Framework for Enterprise, SAFe, for people who know it, are closer to the situation where there is many prescriptions on what roles you need, what artifacts, events, what are the scaling challenges you may need on another level. You don't need to use a framework as big as it is if you have results with a smaller one. So I feel frameworks are there to support your scaling. Do you need them? Very contextual. I don't feel we needed them in 2011, so I'm not really sure we need scaling frameworks right now in 2019. Hope it helps. It's a good discussion about scaling frameworks, so we could run forever on this one.
Yeah, definitely. So we're running a little short on time here, so there are a few questions here that we did not get to. Those will be shared with Pawel after the webinar, and we'll follow up on those offline.
Do we have a time for a final one? Let's see.
Let's see if there's one that might have a quick answer. Okay, this one is.
Thank you for the hint. Quick answer. It's basically for me.
Yeah, we have 4 minutes left, so we want to be conscious of everyone's time. So if a member of the development team is unavailable for the sprint planning session, what is the best way to handle that? Would that mean they're excluded from the sprint? Would that mean that we need to hold a separate session just for them? So.
No, that's a quick one. That's a quick one. The development team as a whole is responsible of what they are going to do during the sprint. So I guess that one team member's absence shouldn't jeopardize the team capability to plan. The team member's absence could be taken into account by the development team when they split the work, when they plan the sprint. So I don't feel that there is a need for another session. Maybe when the member will come in, there could be some sort of improvised 5-10 minutes to catch up at the end of the daily scrum. However, I don't feel it's something that should be considered an additional sprint planning.
Yep. All right. Great. So we need to wrap up here. So if you can go to the next slide, Pawel.
Oh, there is a next slide. Thank you.
There is.
There is a next slide. Okay.
All right. So before we wrap up here, just want to remind everybody that we would love for you all to continue your learning. So feel free to check out our free learning paths on our website. We have one for Scrum Master, Product Owner, Leadership, and for the development team member as well. Lots of great resources on there, videos, webinars, white papers, case studies, all kinds of things. So feel free to check those out. And go to the next slide.
Click.
You can please just stay connected with us. Our forums are a great place to find answers to any unanswered questions that you have. And we're always pushing information out on our social media channels as well, and our blog. So with that, we will certainly follow up on any unanswered questions from this session. I want to thank you so much, Pawel, for your time. I hope this was time well spent for everybody. We'll see you next time. So thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot, guys, for your engagement. It's been a pleasant session, and I loved all the questions. Hope I haven't gone into too much detail and haven't overspent your time. So hope you will enjoy the day wherever you are in the world. Thanks a lot.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.